Titanic. Let's rewind to the early hours of the 15th of April, 1912. That was the night the RMS Titanic, one of the largest and most luxurious passenger ships ever constructed, vanished beneath the icy waters of the North Atlantic. It was on its maiden voyage, bound for New York City. But the Titanic was more than just a ship. It was a floating symbol of human ambition, a marvel of modern engineering, built by the White Star Line. Many believed it was unsinkable, thanks to 16 watertight compartments that, on paper, could keep it afloat even if several were breached. But there was one fatal flaw. The bulkheads didn't extend high enough. If too many compartments are filled with water, it would spill over, like a deadly domino effect. And that's exactly what happened. Here's where things began to unravel. Despite multiple iceberg warnings from nearby ships, Titanic pressed forward at full speed. The crew placed their trust in its design. To them, it was invincible. Then came the night of the 14th of April. At exactly 11:40 p.m., the Titanic struck an iceberg. The jagged ice scraped along the starboard side, slicing open a series of small but deadly wounds below the waterline. At first, it didn't seem like much. Some passengers recalled a faint bump or a gentle jolt, nothing alarming. One of them was Charlotte Collier, a second-class passenger traveling with her husband and daughter. She would later remember, it was a long, drawn backward pull, followed by a short jerk forward. Others slept right through it until the engines fell silent. But soon, reality set in. Water was pouring into the first 5 compartments, more than the ship could survive. The Titanic was doomed. Distress calls were sent, rockets were fired, but the closest ship that could help the RMS Carpathia was simply too far away. It wouldn't arrive until hours later. And then another grim truth emerged. There weren't enough lifeboats. Only 20 were on board, enough for barely half the people. At the time, maritime laws hadn't kept up with the scale of modern ships. Worse still, many lifeboats were launched only partially filled. Some passengers hesitated, thinking it was safer to stay on the massive liner than to brave the freezing sea in a tiny boat. By the time the full danger became undeniable, it was far too late. Out of roughly 2,224 people aboard, only 706 survived. More than 1,500 lives were lost in just a few hours. Most of them were in the lower decks, third-class passengers and crew, many with limited access to the upper levels and the lifeboats. The sinking of the Titanic remains one of the deadliest maritime disasters in recorded history. But out of this tragedy came lasting change. New safety regulations were born, including a requirement that every ship carry enough lifeboats for all souls on board. The disaster also led to the creation of the International Ice Patrol, to monitor icebergs in the North Atlantic and prevent another tragedy. Over time, the Titanic became more than a shipwreck. Its story has echoed through books, documentaries, paintings, and of course, cinema. In 1985, explorers finally discovered the wreck, resting silently on the ocean floor. Since then, expeditions have recovered artifacts and pieced together the events of that night, preserving the memory for generations to come. And even now, more than a century later, the story of Titanic still haunts the deep whispering lessons from the past beneath the waves. Halifax. On the morning of the 6th of December, 1917, a massive explosion shook the busy port of Halifax at the time. It was the biggest man-made blast in history. In just moments, the lively city was reduced to ruins. At the height of World War I, Halifax served as a vital hub linking North America and Europe through a steady flow of weapons and military supplies across the Atlantic. The city, home to around 65,000 people, was a mix of working-class neighborhoods like Richmond and marginalized communities such as the Mi'kmaq settlement of Turtle Grove, situated right near the harbor. That morning, disaster struck when 2 ships collided in the narrow channel. One was the SS Mont Blanc, a French cargo ship loaded with hazardous materials bound for the war effort. The other, SS Imo, was a Norwegian vessel carrying humanitarian aid for Belgium. Due to wartime urgency and relaxed safety protocols, the Mont Blanc was allowed into port without any special warning signs, an oversight with tragic consequences. Imo had been delayed, waiting on coal, and was now eager to leave. Mont Blanc had just arrived the night before. Neither ship was fully informed about the other's cargo or status. As both approached the tightest part of the harbor, a narrow stretch known as the Narrows, the Imo moved too fast and veered into the wrong lane. At 8:45 a.m., the two ships collided. The impact ruptured benzol barrels on Mont Blanc's deck, spilling highly flammable vapor that quickly ignited. A fire broke out as the Mont Blanc drifted slowly toward Pier 6, burning intensely. Crowds gathered on shore, watching the blaze with curiosity. No one knew what was about to happen. At exactly 9:04 a.m., the Mont Blanc detonated with the force of 2.9 kilotons of TNT. The shock wave tore through Halifax at over 1,000 meters per second. Temperatures soared to 5,000 degrees Celsius. A mushroom cloud rose over 3,600 meters into the air. A massive wave nearly 18 meters high crashed into the shores. It was total devastation. One man, Vince Coleman, a railway dispatcher in the Richmond district, received word of the fire and the possibility of an explosion. Knowing a passenger train was en route, he stayed behind to send a final telegraph warning. His message saved around 300 lives but cost him his own. To this day, he remains a symbol of courage and sacrifice. The blast flattened North End Halifax, and the entire Richmond neighborhood over 2 square kilometers reduced to debris. More than 1,630 homes were obliterated. 12,000 buildings were damaged. Around 25,000 people were left without shelter. 6,000 were completely displaced. At least 1,782 lives were lost, and nearly 9,000 people were wounded. Entire communities, such as the Mi'kmaq of Turtle Grove, were wiped out. Black communities like Africville, though heavily affected, received little to no aid in the aftermath, highlighting deep-rooted inequalities. One particularly devastating statistic: nearly 250 people lost their eyesight, many blinded by shattered glass. In just 2 weeks, Halifax doctors performed more emergency eye surgeries than ever imagined possible, pushing the medical system to its limits. This wave of eye injuries led directly to the founding of support systems for the blind, including hospitals, pediatric surgery programs, and the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, CNIB. But while some communities rebuilt with support, marginalized groups like the Mi'kmaq and Africville were largely abandoned, a painful reminder of systemic neglect. The Halifax blast remained the largest artificial explosion in human history until Hiroshima. It set a grim benchmark for the power of industrial accidents and remains a point of reference in military and disaster science. Today, echoes of the event still resonate through the city, twisted metal from the Mont Blanc found kilometers away, memorials to Vince Coleman, and the Memorial Bell Tower standing in silent tribute. What happened in Halifax was not just a wartime accident. It was a tragedy born from urgency, miscommunication, and overlooked warning signs. A moment where human ambition collided with fragile systems and paid a heavy price. The Holocaust. From 1933 to 1945, one of the darkest chapters in human history unfolded in the heart of Europe, a state-led campaign by Nazi Germany aimed at the total removal of Jewish people from the continent. Over 6 million lost their lives, along with millions of others, simply for being labeled as unworthy of life. This was the most thoroughly documented act of state-organized violence in history, now symbolizing the danger of unchecked power in the hands of fanatics, and what happens when hatred becomes law. It all began in 1933, when Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power in Germany. Amid the social and economic collapse following World War I, Jewish communities were blamed for everything from inflation and job loss to a supposed moral decline. Shortly after, a wave of anti-Jewish laws was passed. Jewish people were stripped of citizenship, barred from working in government, academia, and pushed out of public life. They were no longer just discriminated against, they were portrayed as a threat to the so-called purity of the Aryan race. Once World War II broke out in 1939 and Germany began occupying much of Europe, these policies escalated into a coordinated effort of removal and destruction through forced displacement, isolation, and widespread targeting. In 1935, the Nuremberg Laws were enacted, officially revoking all rights of Jewish citizens and creating a legal foundation for total exclusion. Starting in 1939, Jewish populations in occupied areas were forced into overcrowded ghettos with poor sanitation and little access to food, an early phase of what was later called the final solution. By 1941, the plan became fully operational. Facilities like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor were constructed places where mass loss of life occurred through poisonous gas in sealed chambers. Remains were destroyed in high-capacity furnaces. This was a systemized process involving documentation, rail transport, and bureaucratic planning. Jewish communities weren't the only targets. Others included the Romani people, individuals with disabilities, Slavic groups, political prisoners, LGBTQ+ individuals, and anyone deemed undesirable by the regime. Beyond the camps, the suffering extended through mass shootings in forests, forced winter marches, unethical medical tests, forced labor, and widespread deprivation. By the time Allied forces reached the camps in 1945, around two-thirds of the European Jewish population had perished. Additionally, millions of non-Jewish victims had also been affected. The survivors, emaciated, traumatized, and stripped of families and dignity, became living witnesses to a time of unparalleled cruelty. After the war, several Nazi officials were put on trial in Nuremberg and other courts. Yet only a small fraction of SS members were ever prosecuted, while many escaped justice altogether. The 27th of January, the day Soviet troops reached Auschwitz, was later designated as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Institutions like Yad Vashem in Israel continue to gather and preserve the names and records of those lost during the Holocaust. With the help of modern technology and artificial intelligence, more than 2.7 million individual records have been recovered, reconstructing identities through photos, documents, and survivor testimonies. It is a powerful act of remembrance, bringing voices out of the shadows of history. The Holocaust was not just a historical crime. It is a chilling reminder of what can happen when hatred becomes policy and when silence enables injustice. It stands as a timeless warning so that history does not repeat itself. And that was just the beginning. 3 tragedies, each with its weight, its lesson. If one of these stories stayed with you, or reminded you of something else you've read or seen, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.